As we're gathered here this morning, I was thinking about, that today being the day that our nation, honors fathers. And each year is a reminder that there are some in the audience who you had your father last year, you don't have him this year. Or maybe that you didn't have the kind of father that you wanted, and even though another year has passed, the hurt from that still remains. Or it could be that you did have the kind of father that was a great blessing, and those blessings just continue to roll forward as each year goes by. And so no matter where it is that you're at this morning, I hope that we can encourage the fathers that we have, the dads that we have, but not just them, but all of us as we talk about this topic about passing the fruit. And it was really hitting my mind as we were studying in our Wednesday night class about some of the attributes of kingdom citizens, and how it is that we have a responsibility as citizens of the kingdom of God to be teaching that next generation what it means to be a citizen in the Lord's kingdom. What's expected of us? What are we supposed to be doing? And what kind of character are we supposed to be exhibiting? And it kept coming up over and over again about just passing this to the next generation. And so we could really do a whole series, but that's what our Wednesday night class is on all these different attributes. But I really wanted to zero in on this one, because when we think about manhood and what it means to be a man, there's a lot of things that the world causes confusion about. That it seems everything about a man is viewed as being dishonorable and being something that should be squashed and something that's not wanted nor needed in our society. And I think that's just flat out wrong. I think the thing that's caused problems in our society is that we don't have enough real men who stand up and be men. That we've been taught that everything that we do, the way in which we think, the way in which we expel energy, and the way in which it's hard for us sometimes as children to sit still in classes is looked down upon, and we should be something other than what we are. But whereas God created us, and that is to be harnessed. So that's why I want us to talk about self-control, because it is one of the fruits of the Spirit that's mentioned there in Galatians chapter 5. And I think it's the one, too, that when we think about, of the fruits of the Spirit, what is the one that is most closely aligned with maleness, with being learned from our fathers, being learned from men, that we may have the hardest time in harnessing? And I believe self-control is it. And so what we're going to be looking at this morning is this idea of not just being in control of ourselves, but also passing on this self-control to our children and the importance of it, because this is a very needed concept in our world. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So if you're ready for your 3 key words this morning, let's see the notebooks held up high this morning. All right, very cool. All right, your 3 words this morning are fruit, self-control, and legacy. As we said, when you look at Galatians 5, 22 and 23, it's listed as the fruit of the Spirit. And what you notice about that list of the fruit of the Spirit is it's not several different items, though we often do look at them as being individual from one another. But they work in concert and collectively together to form one fruit of the Spirit. What that is pointing to is that when you look at the context, it says that if we walk by the Spirit, we will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And then he lists the lust of the flesh. But then he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is this. And so a person who is living according to the dictates of the Spirit, whose life is directed by what God has said in His Word, those are the kinds of people who are deliberately producing. It's not something that is just an automatic, natural thing, but it has to be dedicated to cultivating, growing, and maturing. And so things like love, joy, peace, long-suffering, goodness, kindness, and indeed self-control is something that you have to be deliberately cultivating in your life. What does the Spirit say about self-control? Because this word self-control that's used there in that verse, that word is only used like a handful of times in the Scriptures. But if I were to ask you, how much does the Bible say about the subject of self-control? You know that from beginning to end, it is filled with the concept and idea of self-control. And there may be some other words that are pointing to self-control, but the word itself is not there that often. And the reason being is because this is something that you need to see. You need to understand what it looks like. You need to know people who practiced it. You need to know how they practiced it. And we need to know how do we instill it within our lives. And this is what indeed leaves us a legacy. That I want to be known by my children that I was not somebody who was always flying off the handle, that I was not so emotionally charged that I could not make wise and prudent decisions, that I was not dictated by my flesh nor my emotions. And though there may be a lot of things that I'm very passionate about, I'm not going to let any of those direct my attention away from what's truly most important. That's what our fathers are. They are that anchor of stability, of self-control within our families, and that is what they should be known for. And so why is this so very important? Let's talk about the necessity of it. First, what does it mean? Self-control, I wanted to read one of the definitions I came upon this week. It is the ability or the strength. Really, it's the idea of strongness, being well attended, to govern one's desires, emotions, thoughts, and actions in obedience to God's will. It is power over oneself. Some of the other synonyms we could use are things like self-restraint or self-mastery or temperance. So let me ask you, when you think about your desires, are they out of control? For me, sometimes there are things that my desires get a little too out of hand. You know, I was very, very thankful when H-E-B opened a store down on Preston. But that was far enough away from me to where I didn't feel compelled to go down there very often. Because I know when I go in H-E-B, something's going to happen. I'm going to go right toward the briskets and see if they're on sale. Briskets are expensive, even when they're on sale. But I like getting a brisket and I like smoking it. There's a lot of things that call to us. When we think about self-control, it is not just about sexual activity, that kind of fleshly desire. But it's about anything that calls to us. Some of you can go down the aisle in the grocery store, and it's like a whole course full of Twinkies that may be calling to you, singing your name and saying, "Hey, come here." And you say, "Okay, I'm just going to take one." Well, yeah, that's all you need, just one. And we do that with a lot of things in life. Being able to master ourselves, to ignore those voices, is what we're talking about. And though we often talk about things like that and we talk about it in a comical way and we kind of laugh about it, there's really nothing funny about a lack of self-control, is there? There's really nothing funny about a lack of mastery over yourself, is there? There's nothing funny when you say, you know, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have an option. I had to, or I couldn't stop myself. I can't say no. And when some of those things, like we were talking about a moment ago, that could be, you know, funny. What about when it does come to other fleshly desires? How do you feel when you can't control your emotions? How do you feel when you feel like you can't control your thoughts? How do you feel when you feel like you just can't control your actions? There's nothing funny about that. And when the Bible talks about self-control, that is something that has to be deliberately practiced. It has to be intentionally developed. And we have to let God be the one who directs us toward what real self-control looks like. And again, fathers, I think this is where our strength really comes in. Because it is about this world we're living in that is about constant gratification and instant gratification of whatever we want, whenever it is that we want it. I want to tell you the truth. The one person on this earth that you're going to have the most trouble dealing with on this earth, the one person that's going to cause you the most problems in your life, is the one that you wake up and look at in the mirror every day. That's the person who's going to cause you the most problems. That is the person that you need to teach to say no to, or learn to say no to. That is the person who's going to give you excuses for not saying no. That is the one who's going to make it all right for you to say yes to things that you've been taught to say no to. That's the person that you're going to have the most problem with. And another truth is this: God will tell you the absolute truth about that person you see in that mirror. He will tell you exactly who that person is. Whether you want to hear it or not, or whether you think it's the truth or not, God will tell you the truth about who that person is and how to put that person to death. That is what self-control is. That is what self-mastery is. And that's why it's so essential. And fathers, we are supposed to be that rock that's able to teach that to our families. And God bless us when we've had those fathers who are those rocks, who can indeed bring themselves under control to say no to those things that they shouldn't. In Romans chapter 7, it's a chapter that we go to often when we talk about the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. And you remember that as Paul is building this argument about how hard this struggle is, he ends at the end of chapter 7 when he even makes this statement, this exclamation, "O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" Because you remember what it is that Paul talks about. He says, there are things that I will to do. I want to do them. But I cannot find within my flesh, the carnal side of me, I can't find anything in there that causes me to say no to that. Everything in my body screams yes to it because I want to do something different, but my flesh is so strong. Even Jesus told his disciples, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so we're supposed to pray that we don't enter into temptation. And Paul is saying over and over again, the things that I don't want to do, I end up doing. Because it's sin that lives in me, in my flesh. My carnal desires are against the things of God. And that's not how I want to be, but it's how I end up being. And what he's pointing to is this lack of self-control in these areas. It's not a matter of willpower, because we do have the will, but we don't have the power of the will. I want things to be different, but I have nothing that strengthens that or moves it. It's like having this fine, fancy, several $100,000 racing car, and it has no gas in it. It has the ability, it has the capability, but it does not have the opportunity. And the reason it doesn't have opportunity is because there's no fuel behind it. What Paul points to in Galatians chapter 5 is this, is that the fuel behind all this is being led by the Spirit. And if you're led by the Spirit, you will have love, you will have joy, you will have peace, you will have goodness and kindness and gentleness, and you will have self-control. But you have got to have fuel behind it. Wishing accomplishes nothing but except for wasting time. We're not about wishing for self-control. We are standards of self-control. We are practicing self-control. There's a verse in Proverbs that I want us to remember throughout this lesson. It's Proverbs 25 and verse 28. It says, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. It's a city that doesn't have walls around it, and it does not matter how beautiful the buildings are. It doesn't matter how productive the crops are. It doesn't matter how wonderful and joyous the people are in the city. It doesn't matter how the streets are never without potholes, and you never run into a stop sign or a red light as you're traveling through the middle of the city. It doesn't matter if the city doesn't have walls, because everything within it comes to destruction. Everything. And so many of us have been raised amongst the Lord's people and been taught for most of our lives what it means to be a Christian and how good and wonderful that is, and praise be to God for that. But if you don't practice self-control, if you don't have rule over your own spirit, everything in there is going to be destroyed. The enemy is coming, and your city is constantly under attack. And the one that stands guard is the one who has that self-control. And that's who our fathers are. Our fathers stand in that door and say, the world may do whatever it wants to do, but when it comes to me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Satan can come so far, but he will not invade this home. I will stand strong, and I will protect this family against all enemies, both outside and inside, because he is not welcome here. The walls of my city are not going to be broken down. When you think about families, you need fathers and you need your parents because of that. Congregations need shepherds because of this. Individuals need self-control because of this. This is part of God's plan, and it's a way in which God has intended for us to stay strong. That even when you think about, so what does it look like? What does a city without walls look like? This is what it looks like. Because when you think about Romans chapter 7, can you not see yourself just written in the pages, on the page in Romans 7? What I want to do, I don't end up doing. What I don't want to do is what I end up doing. I feel like I'm weak. I feel like I'm helpless. I feel like I'm just at the mercy of the whims of my flesh. We can see ourselves written on that. And this is the honesty. This is what you look like. This is what you really look like when you don't practice self-control. Verse 17, the flesh lusts against the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. The works of the flesh are evident: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, all these fleshly desires. This sensual part of us is let loose. That person I was talking about a minute ago, that's our hardest opponent, that gives us the most difficulty. This is who he is. He's an adulterer, he's a fornicator, he's unclean, and he's lewd because he doesn't practice self-control. He's not led by the Spirit. He's an idolater. He's a sorcerer. He's going to find somewhere else to find divine power to intervene in his situation. He's filled with things like hatred, contention, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders. This is the way we treat other people and think about other people. The reason being, we have no self-control. We have no mastery. We do not rule over our own spirit. And we've become a city with broken down walls. Drunkenness. You know why you get drunk? Because you think drinking is okay. You have no self-control. Why is it that we engage in revelries and anything like that? Because we don't practice self-control. We're not led by the Spirit. We give ourselves excuses. A minute ago we laughed because we said something about going down the candy aisle and the Twinkies all screaming out to us and calling our name in a chorus of song. But I'm just going to have one because that's okay. And that's how we do with drinking and drugs and smoking and the way in which we dress and the way in which we look at things we shouldn't. We do it that way because we make excuses for ourselves. It's just going to be this one time. It's just going to be this little bit. I can control it. No, you can't. That's why you cut it out. That's what self-control is. You can't control everything that's going on in the world, but you can control yourself. That's what we're supposed to be about. That's the example that we're setting, and that's the strength that we're supposed to have. So in verses 22 through 26 again, if we're led by the Spirit, we are intentionally doing these things to make sure that we are not under the control of the flesh any longer. In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 27, Paul says, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. Some of the versions use the word buffet, and in some ways I like that word a little bit better, though sometimes we read it as buffet. That's not what it says. But we buffet our bodies, which literally means you take your fist and you beat yourself with it. That I will not give in to desires. I'm going to beat those desires into submission to myself. And it feels just that way. It is like beating myself into subjection. Lest when I've preached to others, even Paul himself says, I myself should become disqualified. This was an example that I came upon that I think would be really good, and especially here in Texas. Tom Landry, the football coach of the Dallas Cowboys in years past, he said the job of a football coach is to make men do what they don't want to do in order to achieve what they've always wanted to be. And you think about how appropriate that is for a subject like self-control. It's making myself do the things that I don't necessarily want to do, that I know I'm not going to enjoy, that I'm going to delay pleasure and gratification because I want to be someone different. One of the things that we too often do is we put too much of a burden on future self. I want to get everything that I want to get right now. And I'm not going to be too concerned about how much it costs or what I have to go through in order to achieve it, because future Eddie is going to be a lot more controlled than present Eddie. Future Eddie is going to be able to control his passions and desires. He's going to say no to a lot of other things to pay for the things that I'm buying now. He's going to be a lot more controlled, so he'll be able to live a lot healthier than what I'm living now. And we don't think about the debt and the problems and the hardship I'm putting on my future self. The reason we feel like we're in a constant cycle is because we're in a constant cycle. And instead of lining out and going on a straight line toward these things that are better, we just wallow in it. Dads, we have a special role when it comes to things like this, in teaching the kind of self-control that is needed. We are very unique in the role that God has given to us about this and about our spiritual headship. Ephesians 6 and verse 4, it is specifically stated, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. It takes training for them to be practicing self-control. We teach them from a very young age about how to control their emotions, to control their outbursts, to control their allowance, to control their surroundings and their rooms and making sure they're clean, and controlling their interactions with other people, about kindness and respect for others, about controlling themselves when they come into a place where we're all going to be worshiping and honoring our God. We teach them these things gradually. We train them in these things. And we do that by showing them. With elders, it says in 1 Timothy 3, 4, and 5, that one who rules his own house well is qualified, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? That means that elders are supposed to be showing themselves as being able to train their own children on how to control themselves, so they're not accused, as the Titus qualifications point out, insubordination and debauchery. We need to be able to teach these things. This is what it means to be the kind of man that God expects for us all to be, so that even if we're not going to be qualified to be elders, or we're not going to be elders for whatever reason it may be, don't let it be because we can't rule our own houses, because that's where the testing ground is. Because our self-control, the fruit of our self-control, is shown especially when we're under stress. And in our homes, we're going to be under stress a lot. And our families are going to see us in times of crucial decision-making moments, where the right direction is critical for the family. And fathers, we feel that weight, do we not? And if we're emotional wrecks in the middle of that, or we're always wringing our hand about, well, what if this or what if that? What does that do to our families? That's why I wanted us to talk about this with the father's role and our responsibility. Be thankful for your dads that when things were going on, when you didn't know how the bill was going to be paid this month for something, but you never knew it looking at daddy. There's some emotional struggle that's going on, or some hardship or difficulty going on. You wouldn't have known it by looking at daddy. That's the kind of rock that we men are supposed to be. And that's why self-control is so important. And that's why we as fathers, as men, have a very special role and responsibility when it comes to that, because God has given us the unique responsibility of leadership, that within the Lord's church, that there's times where there's turbulent waves and there's people who may be causing dissension and arguments and problems, but you wouldn't know it from looking at the elders or the preacher and the men of the congregation who are engaged and active and productive within the Lord's body. The ones who are running around, you've heard the expression before, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, are the ones who lack self-control. Men, we have a unique role that God has blessed us with, but it is a burden and it is a load to carry. And thank God we have our Savior that helps us carry that load, because we walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. And that's why we put those things to death that would be opposed to the things of God. The kind of confidence that it instills, that when you have the leader of your family that takes the words that were commanded to him, that he understood, that he obeyed, applying it today, the one who has heard the teachings of Jesus Christ, who has submitted himself to those things, who is now a child of God, And every day he teaches them diligently to his children. And it's not by just sitting down and doing a Bible class, but it's when he sits in the house, he talks about these things. It's part of his normal day-to-day conversation, that when we go somewhere, when we go on walks, when we go on drives, when we observe the things that God has created and what God has done, we bring attention to it to our family. And how it is that we have trusted God. And that's why we are so blessed. It's not a matter of how much we actually have around us. That's the true blessing. But it's a matter that God is with us, and that's why we are so blessed. And that just by following him, we are going to be just fine. There's nothing that we have to fear because we have our God. When we lie down, when we get up, this is the life that's well ordered that way. That's the way you pass on that legacy to that next generation. Someone who is consistently involved in that, a person who has a disciplined walk with his God, teaches his children to trust in God and his guidance no matter what the dictates of life bring his way. And so let's close with just talking about just a few areas. There's a lot of areas that we could discuss, but I wanted to mention just a few. Speech and temper. In other words, impatience and anger. I think this is one of the areas in which we all need probably some more self-control. And in our homes, it's often exhibited, but it's also exhibited just when you don't really think people are watching. And we know verses that teach us, like in James 1:19 and 20, that every man should be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, because the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. We know verses like Proverbs 29 and verse 11, but it's one of the verses that I think I need to have written somewhere. Maybe I need to have this verse written and taped on my speedometer on my vehicle. So the next time in traffic, I realize that it's a fool who vents all of his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Maybe the next time I hit send on a text message or an email, I need to have that verse on my computer. It's a fool who vents all of his feelings. Make no mistake about it, the Bible does not use the word fool haphazardly, but it shows the dictates of a person's life. Fool and wise are words that are used for the way in which people live. It's personified in the Scripture. And this is how you know the difference between them. Maybe the next time I want to have an argument with my spouse, maybe I need to have it on the mirror in the bathroom. It's a fool who vents all of his feelings. Maybe the first thing I see when I get up in the morning is it's a fool who vents all of his feelings. A wise man holds them back. To teach me to practice some self-control over the things that I say and the feelings that I feel. Because we have to bring those things under self-mastery. In Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 7, it is a true statement that there is a time to keep silence and there is a time to speak. And fathers, whenever we feel frustrated or angry, that boy that you have brought into this world has once again decided he is not going to do his homework and he is not going to clean his room, and he is talking back to his mother, and he is showing disrespect toward others, and that child you brought into the world, you want to take out of this world. They see that anger and they know that frustration. But fathers, when we choose to deliberately pause, to pray quietly, to respond in a calm manner of correction, instead of explosive anger and punishment, that lesson is much more important than the discipline, the corporal punishment that you're wanting to inflict. I know the feeling that is there, but it's much better to think about who it is I want him to become and not just that, please stop being on my nerves right now. There's more important lessons to be taught, and self-control is one of them. And so we need to do that appropriately. Moral purity and impulse control. You remember in Genesis chapter 39 that you have Joseph who's been sold into slavery. He's in Potiphar's household. And you remember the account that is there, that Potiphar's wife looks at Joseph, and it says that he's a very attractive young man. I kind of get the feeling that this may not be the first time that Potiphar's wife has engaged in such activities or ways of thinking. But she begins pursuing after Joseph. And she's trying to get him to lie with her. And he says, I'm not going to do this thing. that your husband has put me in charge of everything he has. He doesn't even know what he has. He knows that I'm able to put the meals on the table for him. So he trusts me with everything he has in his house. The only thing that he's kept back is you, because you're his wife. And I'm not going to do this evil because it would be against God. But she's not taking no for an answer. And so one day when he's in the house, they find themselves alone in the house. And she reaches out and tries to grab him, and he runs, he flees from that. It's a great lesson about moral purity and impulse control. But did you notice the situation? They find themselves alone. Remember what I was talking about earlier about there's things in our life that seem to call out to us? They're always there. Young men finding yourselves alone with your cell phones and alone with your computers. And I know the struggles that you have because you've talked about them, you confessed them, you've prayed yourself and you've prayed with others about this temptation and this struggle that you go through. Joseph had two choices: to no longer be alone or to no longer be in that situation. Something had to be left behind. When you're going through that struggle, and whatever that struggle may be, but since we're talking about this one, let's continue. When you see yourself in that situation, you have a choice. No longer be alone. You have to go somewhere. You have to be around other people, because you would not do this with brethren being present. But you forget that God sees it, or you ignore that God sees it. Maybe it does require taking the door completely off of your room to where you can't be alone. Maybe it does require leaving your phone, turning off your phone, letting someone else keep your phone or your computer. Because we know how it all is that there's ways around the filters and the guards that can be placed on that. And we know that there are ways around that. Just like there would have been ways around Joseph excusing his behavior and trying to ignore the fact that God is still watching and God is still there. You know, when the scriptures teach us in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13 that every temptation we have is common, but God is the one who is faithful. And he's not going to allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. But with the temptation will also make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. That means there is a way out of that situation. There is a way to leave that behind and to escape it. But when we make excuses, do you want to know what rebellion looks like as opposed to stumbling? Stumbling is when you're trying and you fall to temptation. Yes, you're still guilty. And yes, you still need forgiveness. But there's a difference in that and knowing that God provides a way of escape and ignoring it and making excuses for it. That is what rebellion looks like. That is what bold-faced disobedience looks like. Because to take the way of escape that God gives us requires self-control. It requires that I'm going to make that person in the mirror listen to me because I'm not listening to him anymore. I don't care how many voices are crying out to me, I'm not going to listen to them anymore. Dads, our sons need us. Our sons need us. And they need us for things like this. Our daughters need us. And they need us for things like this. We are different when it comes to how we're wired when it comes to things like this. It is a hard temptation to defeat. We need to teach self-control. And we need to be in control of ourselves. In Psalm 101 and verse 3, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. We need to see that whenever we make this deliberate decision and that guarding our eyes and our hearts is a way that we devote ourselves to our God, that we take the oath that I will not set anything wicked before my eyes. There's a lot of impulses that we need to bring under control. And it's not just about, as I said before, the fleshly desires. But even when it comes to things like debt and spending money, you feel like your finances are out of control. You don't know where it's going. You know it's bleeding out of your account, but you don't know where the bleeding's coming from. You know it's happening. and you feel like you're in a hole, always. You've heard the expression before that when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And that's what happens. That's why we can't get out of it. We just keep making it deeper and deeper instead. Somehow by making the hole deeper, we feel like things are going to be better. One last one, and then we'll conclude for this morning. Time management and priorities. I love this verse in Proverbs. Proverbs 24, verse 27 says, prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house. That is a verse that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of meditation. Prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house. In other words, before you make yourself comfortable, you need to have something to eat. Before you make yourself comfortable, you need to make things right for yourself in the field. You need to work. You need to sweat. You need to prioritize. And you need to do things in the proper order. We like to make ourselves comfortable and then figure out how we're going to pay for the comfort. Here it says, work in the field. Do your work outside. Get things in order the way they're supposed to be. You can build your house and get comfortable later. That's not today. Today is work. Today's being in the field. Today is making priority in your life. Comfort comes later, if ever. But you work today. Time management and having our priorities in straight is something that is so much needed in our society because we all are all about that instant gratification, that we need to plan our tasks wisely and in order. So, fathers, some of the ways in which you can do this is when you're supposed to be somewhere, be on time. Isn't that such a dirty word in our society? Be on time. When your kids have something, a play or presentation at school, show up and show up on time. Put the work in first to make sure you're going to be there. If you're constantly late, quit digging the hole. Whatever it is that's causing you late, you got to start earlier. You got to start the night before. Maybe you need to start today to be ready for next week. I don't know. But be on time. That's one of the ways in which we teach our children. Because one of the things it teaches is not just about valuing time, but being late is disrespectful. It's disrespectful toward other people. It's not keeping a commitment that we made to someone, that I'll be there at such and such time. It's not appropriate. And we need to be teaching our children to honor God and to honor others by practicing self-control. And so these are just a few areas. I'm sure there's a lot more that you can come up with. But this morning, the question I want to ask is, what fruit are you passing on to others? All of those are so needed in Galatians chapter 5. I loved studying this week and thinking about what does that really mean to pass that fruit on to those who come behind us. Because the fruit of the Spirit is meant to be enjoyed. It is like fruit that we have that's ripe and full of juice, and we enjoy eating it, and the comfort and the pleasure it gives to us is so wonderful. I want my children and grandchildren to enjoy that as well. So we need to pass this on toward others. If you found today that you're lacking in that you need help, then let us know about that. If there's something where you have failed and you want to get back on track, let us know about that, because we can all identify with this and we can help one another along the way. If you're not a Christian this morning and you've been delaying, putting off obeying the gospel, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and you're willing to confess before this audience that you believe that He is just that, the Messiah, the Son of God, then we can baptize you so that your sins can be forgiven. Please let us help in any way we can. As together we stand and sing, please come.